my dad was an entrepreneur. He ran his own business. And when my older sister, was first investing in her first property when we were in our early 20s, I was actually saving up to go overseas. And he said to me, it's an investment of a different type. And I will never regret the year that I spent overseas. But I worked overseas. So I worked in Hong Kong. And when I got back, I had a nice little lump sum. And so I put that into a small flat. And then my partner at the time went on to become my husband. We then got in the habit of buying properties and buying and holding. So rather than doing up and flipping and selling, we would buy and hold. So we got to a point where we had around 7 or 8 just small apartments, and that got us to the point where we could then buy our first home, big family home that we bought was actually at the time 3 properties. So we lived in one part of it and rented the other 2 parts out until sort of once we'd started having a family. By the time I was expecting my 3rd child, so I'm a mother of 4, we brought the whole property back as to become one property, renovated, extended, and it became our big family home. And that was the point where we then started selling some of the properties that we were holding, and they paid sort of for that lifestyle. And from there, we then upgraded to a property with a view. So I live on the bay in Melbourne, and we had a view of the water, and that was sort of the thing that really got us to the position that we were, sort of that supply and demand. Views are in demand, and we had a view of the water. So, yeah, so we ended up rebuilding that property, and then that got me to the point where I was able to fund some of the lifestyle choices, and that's how I got into mountaineering.
And I'm not sure if, along the way or maybe today, like you keep up with, the international real estate market. Obviously, you're in Australia. A lot of our listeners are in the States, but we do have listeners from across the globe. And I'm just curious if, as just an interesting data point, if there's any interesting nuances, the difference between investing in real estate in Australia versus the United States, or if it follows if you've seen similar cycles, like when the housing market was up or down in the United States, it seemed to kind of follow like on a global trend, or was it a completely different cycle?
I don't follow what happens in the US, but we were really fortunate that we were investing at a time when it was on the up. So we kept thinking we were at the peak and we better not buy another one. Yeah. But no, we were lucky that it kept going up in that period. So I think that was really lucky. That was not good intentions on our part. We just sort of lucked in at a good period, which was the sort of the late 90s, early 2000s. Whereas if I'd been 5 or 10 years earlier, we had quite a strong recession here in the state that I live in, and with really high interest rates. And then we're in a high interest rate period now, which is really challenging for families and I guess for investment. But another thing that they have in Australia is negative gearing. So I'm not sure you're aware how that works.
Not aware, no.
No. So it's actually an interesting position to sit in because in many ways I benefited from it, although we always had. But negative gearing works that if you purchase a property and you make a loss from it, between what your rent is and what your mortgage is, then you can offset that on your tax. Now, our properties were always positively geared, so we were in a high rent period, so we didn't really get the benefit from it. But unfortunately, it has the opposite effect in Australia at the moment where we've got a bit of a housing crisis. And I think because there's so many investors in the market, it's an investment option, so it has a negative impact on sort of home ownership and then rental accommodation. So there's always sort of flip sides, I think, to whatever your government is doing and how they're setting up how you can invest. Yeah.
And was real estate for you and your partner at the time, was that an intentional choice to reach financial freedom, or did you just like to do it because it was fun and eventually you're like, this rental income is actually covering the cost of our lifestyle? Or is it more like every single property we get is $500 more per month in cash flow? We need 10 of these to replace the current cost of our lifestyle.
Yeah, okay. So we weren't increasing our lifestyle from it because we had a mortgage over everyone. So all our rent was covering our mortgage with maybe a tiny bit because we were positively geared, a little bit left over. So it was a definite investment choice to grow these properties, grow and hold. So we were doing it for growth, not to flip, not to get an instant sort of conversion in being able to grow them that way. So I think some people will flip and then buy something a bit more expensive and do it that way. We were buying and holding. Yeah, but it was definite for, that idea of compounding interest. And I think kind of going back to where we got our ideas from were probably like the Robert Kiyosaki book, The Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So looking at how you can, compounding interest, buying, holding, and growth. And it was a long-term strategy. So for us, it worked over probably a 10-year period.
And during this time frame, are you also either one or both of you like having your own a separate career running in parallel? And is there at any point kind of like a transition where you start to say, like the career is actually getting in the way of us going full tilt into this whole real estate thing that's working out really well for us?
No, so we both kept careers going. And one thing I like to say is I was a draftee at the time, which is like I did engineering drafting, so drawing, and he was a nurse. He was a psych nurse. So we were a nurse and a draftee living amongst the architects and doctors in the suburb that we were in because of our investment choices. Yeah. So we were, pretty modest incomes at the time. And I let my, I stopped working once I had my fourth child. So that was a sort of a choice then. In looking at what I could have done, I actually wish that I had kept working in hindsight, not knowing that this marriage wasn't going to last forever. So, I wish I'd kept working because it is harder then to get back into the workforce later down the track when you need to. Yeah. But it did give us a position where I'm no longer together, I still own my own home. So I own my home outright, and that puts me in a really good, solid position of feeling, of safety and choices that I can make.
Well, I think you're being a little too hard on yourself here, Jane, because working and raising 3 kids simultaneously, you're like, I had to give it up when I had the 4th. Yeah, exactly. But the fact that you were still working with 3 is amazing. I mean, that is that is something I can't relate to, but that is one heck of a feat. So don't beat yourself up too much over that.
Okay.
I do want to talk, and I know that you have openly shared some of the financial abuse that you've gone through. And I think we have a lot of people in our audience who maybe have gone through something similar, or maybe not to the scale that you endured or went through. But I think that they can take a lot of learning lessons. And maybe this is something that isn't talked about openly enough. So I'd love if you could take a second to kind of talk about what happened and how you navigated that.
Yeah, so like one of the things that I just touched on in not working. So I found that trying to then come back on my own, living single, you're coming back into the workforce with a different earning capacity. So for someone that's worked through a period, I was about 10 years out of the workforce, my earning capacity was much lower. And that affects things such as when I went to a bank, they said, no, you wouldn't be able to get a mortgage. So I was fortunate I could purchase a home. But if I needed to extend it or, make changes to it or needed additional funds to at least make that purchase, I wouldn't have got a mortgage because of my income. And then even credit cards sometimes are challenging to get for that reason. In my case, it was just deception. So once we were in a position where we had rebuilt our home and owned the home, we had access to like margin loan facilities. And I just assumed that my partner was doing wise investments. So we'd got to this position, we'd done really wise investing over our sort of 20-year period together. And then it was only after the marriage ended that I realised that we'd actually been suffering quite severe losses. And they weren't put out on the table when we were, doing our financial agreement. And then even once we had an agreement in place, 12 months later, he reneged on that. It got reduced by 20%. I'm okay. I still have my kids, live with me. Everything is fine. But when you understand that how that happens, how those systems are used against women, primarily women, it can work either way, but generally in Australia in particular, there is a gender disparity. And it's the person that you trust the most, so you don't see it coming. Yeah. So I never would have imagined that we were losing the amount of money that we were losing in our investments at the time because I wasn't watching them. Yeah.
And the part that you said right there about and I didn't see it coming, that's the part that I think I'm kind of interested to hear. I mean, I know you have like this is a subject that you're passionate about and thinking about, like financial abuse, especially that women are probably more likely or maybe see more often, even though, like you said, it could work both ways. Like, are there things that either from your own experience or just from being out there and talking to people that you see as common things that people really need to watch out for? Like, everything may seem fine, but like some telltale signs or some common things that people have come across where there is maybe financial abuse that, people don't think about as like as a form of abuse, but it really is.
Well, there's some good places where you can go to that'll give you a list. Now, I didn't cover, if you look at that list, I wouldn't have thought that I was on that list because I had financial freedom. So I had the ability to have my own credit card. I had the ability to make my own choices. Hindsight, I was probably judged on some of those choices. So sometimes I would second guess if I'd spent too much money on something. Why am I not buying no-name brands? Why am I spending a lot on that? And then on the flip side, we'd do a really expensive purchase where I'd go, oh, okay. So I was constantly in this back and forth feeling. So that can be one sign where you're not 100% confident that you're both in equal control of what the finances are. But yeah, I always had access to credit cards at the time. I could spend how I wanted to. I thought I'd made a choice not to work. So I love being home with my kids. That was fantastic. But found it harder to get back into the workforce. So I would be encouraging my daughters to ensure that you continue in the workforce, because if and when your marriage doesn't survive, it has implications down the track. Yeah, so that can be another sign. And then it affects women in so many different ways. And because you have this sort of checklist of what it could be or red flags, there might be 10 things and only one of them affects you. So you think, oh, perhaps, no, I don't tick all 10, so I'm not it's not a problem for me. Yeah, but the hardest part is that it's the person that you think you can trust the most.
So, if you don't mind, could we walk through that period or just give us a snapshot of what's going on after you and your then husband, you file for divorce, you figure all the things out, you find out that he's been losing a lot of money in these accounts. You're a mother of 4. You said you had kept all the kids. Do you jump right back into the workforce? Like, how does that even work? Like, childcare and having people watch them. And I can just imagine it was chaos at the time.
Yeah, well, actually, one of the reasons it keeps you in relationships is the age of my kids. So when I left, when it ended, I had 3 in school. One was in the final year of school. And so then I realised, all right, I've got 4 years left of my kids still in schooling. I was working at that point. So when the youngest reached secondary school, I went back. I flipped out of working in engineering and architecture, and I moved into education. So I'm actually really passionate about that. I love it. So it was a low-earning profession, still is, but I was doing it alongside his high salary. So it was like it's something I could just really enjoy doing. And so I've kept going with that. But when our house was sold, I took my portion of the money, purchased something else because I wanted the security of owning my home, and then kept some aside because I knew that my income wasn't high enough. So I needed some of the capital from that sale to then use those savings. So that's what I've been using. So, yeah, when that wasn't as big as I thought it was going to be, was okay, but it still had an impact. Like you do your planning and then you've just got to adjust it a bit. Yeah, but, really supportive workplace, love the work that I do. I work with kids. This was all happening around the period of 2020, 2021. So we were in and out of lockdowns here in Melbourne. So it was also, I think, something that kept me really sane as well. So, I think it's great when your work can be a bit of a choice in what you're doing. Because, working with kids, it's just fun. I laugh a lot.
And I definitely don't want to spend the whole episode just focusing in on the, like the separation part. But one thing I'm curious about, because like I know from my own experience, my parents got divorced when I was 8. And when my dad left, like my mom's income was very, very low. Things just changed dramatically. Like the amount, like, what a vacation, the idea of a vacation and going on one was very different if we could even do one, like just things around the house. Like everything was just so much tighter. And I always appreciated the way she navigated that. And, even though things were tough for us, but I'm just curious with the children and with the lifestyle, like, did you feel like that you had to greatly change their lifestyle, like your spending, or were you kind of always frugal and were able to continue with that? Or was there, I don't know. I'm just kind of curious, like how that impacted, their viewpoint of what day-to-day life looked like and how you navigated that. And maybe there's some nuggets of wisdom out there for somebody that finds himself in that position where maybe they're coming to the table with less income now than their kids are used to. And, and just how to navigate that situation.
Yeah, I think that, again, that's an area where I was really fortunate. But the thing I find impacts me is cash flow. I keep getting stuck in cash flow problems where I won't have planned the month properly, and I'll realise either my salary hasn't come in yet or I haven't made adjustments to withdraw from investments, and I get stuck with that. And so I'm kind of a little bit able to smile about it, but I think that the problem that you have when your income is low is if you've budgeted for your, every day, your weekly, monthly expenses, and then your car breaks down or the washing machine blows up. Like one of the things that makes me laugh at the moment is the kitchen that I'm in. It's a 20-year-old kitchen. It's beautiful. It's fine. It's functional. But I actually keep the oven door closed with a piece of wood because I don't need to upgrade it. I love the house that I am. It's my home. I feel safe. It's a place that I love. And I'm like, all right, I can probably do that down the track. But for some people, that's a serious problem. So if you don't have access to a functioning kitchen, if you don't have access to a functioning laundry, if your car breaks down and you don't have that cash flow to repair it, that these things do have a big impact on people's lives. And it must be really challenging, I think, if children are witnessing that. Why is it so different in one house and in the other one? Yeah. So my children made a decision. So the younger two that were living with me made a decision to spend more time with mum, and I didn't request any additional funds to cover that. But, sometimes I think that's also challenging for them as well. Yeah.
So let's start to talk about your love for climbing and
I
what
love this
sparked
part.
that at the beginning of the journey, because you're from Australia. Australia is definitely not known for its mountains. There's
That's right.
something that people might not know, and I actually learned this from there's a pass called the Icon Pass for skiers and snowboarders. I was like, there's a mountain in Australia? I never would have thought that. But there are a few mountains in Australia, but not too many. So how and why did this love for climbing begin for you?
Yeah, so for me, I think going back to when I was quite young. So I grew up in scouting, so that gave me that outdoor activities, hiking, trekking. We were into kayaking, so we did a lot of paddling down the snowy rivers as the snow was melting. And then in my 20s, I travelled to India and Nepal. Absolutely loved that journey. Stayed with a family in Nepal while I was there, just a really strong memory. So I think in your 20s, you really form strong memories as well. So then when my my son was 15, he did a school trip to Nepal. And I think I'm in the background sort of him going, oh, do they take mums on this trip? Do you think I can come? And it's like, no. So then my daughter didn't have that option to have a school trip, was goal setting one day and said, oh, one day I'd love to climb Mount Everest. And so then this plan was hatched. Well, why don't we get the journey started now? And so we did a trek to Everest Base Camp. So I was preparing for that, thinking this is the sort of trip of a lifetime, mother-daughter, the one thing that we do, and then I'll do something with our next child and something with the next child. But while we were there, the plan then sort of became a little bit more cemented in, how do you climb for Everest? So what you should be doing is trek to base camp, then climb a 6,000 metre mountain, then try a 7,000 metre mountain, then climb 8,000 metres, and then see if you can then do that. So we hatched this plan. We found out that the youngest Australian was 19, almost 20 at the time, so 19 and a half. And went, well, maybe if Gabby does it at 17, we'll break a record as well. So then every 6 months we went back to Nepal. So she did 4 journeys She was successful at 6,000 metres. 7,000 metres we didn't have success, so we got to only about 6,500. I got sick on that journey as well, so that was the first time I got laryngitis, lost my voice. But I chose not to do one of the summit peaks that we were doing, and then the second one they couldn't get the ropes fixed. So both of those summits I didn't get on that journey. And that was actually a real learning for me, that your summits are never guaranteed as well. So then 6 months later, we went off to Tibet and climbed a mountain called Choi Yu. So it's the 6th highest mountain. And I think when we reached the summit of that one, we sort of looked at each other and went, oh, this is actually serious. We are trained. Our bodies adapt really well. We get along really well when we're doing it. So Gabby's now the youngest the youngest woman in the world to climb that mountain. And then we were all set to go in 2020. Everyone's holidays got cancelled that year. And so we planned it for 2 years later, and she did it at just after her 19th birthday that we left. So that was the journey. It sort of condenses down to quite a short, but there was a lot of adventures in all of that time. So on Choi Yu, we got stuck in a tent for a few days in a blizzard, with a 16-year-old, and I was still her mum, so mum still took on a lot of those mum duties. But something I often say to people is I think I actually regressed back to being the 16-year-old rather than her growing up.
Well, I think this is like a great example of like just getting out there and trying things, because you never know where it might go, like saying yes to invites, all that sort of thing, because you just never know what kind of domino gets put in place. And like you said, it obviously turned into quite the adventure, much more than just like, hey, let's go check out Everest Base Camp. But with this being, a financial show, I'm curious, like, I have always heard, but I've heard such a wide range. I've always heard these like astronomical numbers for what it would cost to hike Everest. And you're not just talking about hiking Everest, you're talking about all the other hikes just to get you ready to try to attempt to hike Everest. So I don't know if there's a way for you to give the audience an idea of like what kind of financial position do you have to be in to even attempt some of these things?
Yeah, so we were fortunate in that we looked at it two ways when we were planning these journeys. One of them was thinking that if my daughter Gabby got this, summit achievement and was the youngest Australian to do so, that would open up opportunities down the track for her. So we looked at what the future would be. So, perhaps she can get a scholarship to college. So we will be saving money down the track. So what we invest now will be a saving for her. But we're also in a position where we owned most of our home, so we were able to access redraw on our mortgage, and that's what was paying for the trip. So we could borrow money for the bank, but it was, offset against the house, so at home lending rates as opposed to needing to borrow money for it, thinking that this would get paid off over 20 or 30 years. So again, when you're paying something off over that period, it doesn't seem as insurmountable at the time that you're doing the purchase. But yeah, the cost is high. It's graduates, the higher you get, the more it costs. To invest in an Everest expedition, you're looking at between 40 and 60,000, and then it goes up from there. And so, everything we did was double, and then you've got your gear investment as well. So it's the most I've ever spent on a pair of boots, $1,300. That's some nice boots to wear on Saturday night that cost that much money, but you don't skimp on that type of gear when you go into that extreme environment. And that was all accumulated along the way as well. So we were gradually building up all the gear. So we didn't just arrive, a month before the Everest expedition and go out and buy everything that we needed.
So it sounds like you quickly rebounded after the split and you got your finances back in order. I know you mentioned you were joking about having the oven closed with the piece of wood and stuff, but are you just a naturally frugal person? Like during this journey, it's like from the split until now or from the split until the hike, are you still able to save a percentage of your income as a teacher and invest it into whether it's real estate or the stock market or other things? Or I guess, how are you cash flowing an adventure like this?
At the moment? Yeah, so it's not through my income. No. So my income just covers my lifestyle and my expenses. So when you've got two teenagers at home, that's pretty much where all my income goes. So because I own my home, I don't have mortgage repayments, so that makes a huge difference. And then just because of my age, I've then got the ability to now access some of the equity in my home. So that's what will be my next plan. So I kept a little kitty aside, which was savings, and that was able to fund holidays up to this point. And then going forward, I can access the equity that I've got in the home that I've got. Yeah, and so then I've sort of got lots of options. Sometimes I look at what the next plan could be. So I moved out of a beautifully newly built home that was custom built around our family. So sometimes I look at I've got a beautiful little heritage house that I'm living in, a little 4-bedroom house. I shouldn't say little, it's a beautiful 4-bedroom home. Picket fence, a front yard, and a pool out the back. So yeah, I can see how blessed I am. I really completely appreciate all the benefits and privileges that I have. But yeah, maybe the next thing I do is a project where I can, use the capital that I've got, maybe downsize to a smaller property, and that'll free up more of my capital to then be available to travel and to continue climbing. So I've made a decision to not climb over the last couple of years. By climbing, I mean big mountains, the 8,000s, because I've just got these last few years to get my younger kids through school. So I actually really enjoy being present, because an expedition is 5 to 8 weeks away. And at the moment, I don't want to be away from my kids. So when I went away with Gabby, we were a unit of 6 people. So you take 2 out of that equation, and there's still a bustling household of 4 people. But now it's just me and 2 kids, or my son's living overseas, so me and my daughter living together. So I'm thriving on that time that we've got left together, because once she's 18 and she's an adult, might just seem to grow wings and fly. So it's a finite period that you've got them as kids, and as they get older, you realise just how precious this time is. They'll be adults for the rest of their life. I'm still the 50-plus adult child if I've still got my dad, so I kind of look at it that way. I think I've matured a little bit, but I'm still the same person, still the same adult. Whereas those little kids, those little chubby cheeked little cherubs, they grow up and they're gone. So that time is so precious. And even these teenage years, they're challenging, but they are really precious, and it'll pass. Yeah, so I really want to be present for this time.
I know for me, and I think it's a fairly universal thing, like getting outside and then also like pushing yourself through really hard challenges, which, I mean, obviously something like Everest is, harder than anything I've ever done or could imagine doing. That it pushes you to, or it gives you these opportunities to have a lot of like reflection and think about like what's important in life. And I assume that maybe that had something to do with some of the advocacy that now you work on, or I don't know. I just didn't know if you could talk a little bit about your experience on how like going through some of these hard challenges and pushing yourself through these physical things also maybe open up doors, like mentally, to think about like what you could do in the world for some like greater causes and what those causes you've chosen.
Yeah, I've always been involved in social justice causes. So I sit on a board for a school for refugee women, so the River Nile School. I love being part of that. I was part of a social justice network for my son's school. So when I was on the verge of doing this trip, I realised I haven't fundraised for charity. I'm not sponsored or anything. So I want to take something. So I approached a few organisations that had touched me for some reason. So the message I ended up climbing with is Teach Us Consent, and it's about consent education. And I have 2 sons and 2 daughters. So one of the reasons I think that really touched me is not just the wanting my daughters like to feel that they are protected and safe, but wanting the message that my sons are educated and understand and know what empathy looks like versus what entitlement looks like. But this campaign focuses on bigger topics also around gendered violence. So I think we're having a bit of a reckoning both in our homes, in our countries, in our towns, but also it's unfortunately happening in the mountains as well, which is the last place I expected to see this sort of need for women's consent education to be considered. That, there was headlines in the New York Times recently that women don't only have to worry about avalanches when they're in the mountains. Unfortunately, their bodily safety isn't always considered. So yeah, I don't know if you hit sort of middle age, where I sit, and you get a bit ragey going, I thought I'd done everything I could. I thought I'd been an empowered young woman. I thought I had made choices that would keep me safe. I thought I was doing all the right things. And then you realise, no, there's systems in place that are working against women. And so it's those systems that we want to start breaking down, or calling attention to. What can we be doing different that's going to affect everyone? I know that I sit in a position of having white privilege. So the fact that, one, it's very much a white man's sport, climbing. So, there's a lot of advantages that I get simply by the fact that I'm white, that other women don't experience. So people of colour experience greater violence in Australia, at least. So I think it's a team approach, and what's actually really wonderful is to be able to sit with a few young men and have this discussion and go, we're not attacking you. We want you to, be open, ask questions, have conversations, ask what can we be doing better. I haven't done everything right in the past. I haven't understood all the language in the past. I've joked about things that I now regret joking about. So what can I do better next time? And that's what we want to be doing, is what can we be doing better, and how can we have empathy for everyone, not just look after our own needs, but have empathy for everyone.
So you have a lot of expertise in a lot of different arenas that we've touched on today. You are a real estate investor, reached financial independence at an early age. You're a teacher. You have experience in architecture is it a drafty? Was that the name of it?
Yeah, drafty is what I say. Drafty.
Okay, that was
So again, I used to always call myself a draftsman and say, it's too many syllables in draftsperson, draftswoman. And then I hit this age and I'm like, no, I'm tired of this gendered language. So drafter or drafty is what I say.
I like it. Then you're also involved with Teach Us Consent. I'm curious which lessons, I'm guessing probably a little bit of each, but which lessons you're passing down to your kids and how? Like I said, you're a wealth of knowledge in all these different subject areas. Like, how on a tactical basis are you passing down some of this knowledge, some of these actions to your 4 kids?
Yeah, well, certainly financially. I think they have something that I had when I was young was to aspire to have what I grew up in, and then maybe a little bit more. So I think that we all expect that we're going to keep progressing. So I think that's what my kids have. They've had a very blessed life. They've had beautiful holidays, they've had these adventures. So they see, hopefully, the way that we have invested, okay? So understanding how compound interest works, putting a little bit away early, and then it works also in your training as well. So, if you're going to do Kilimanjaro or you're training for a marathon, you can't just wake up and wing it and do that. So putting all that work in early, small bits along the way is what works. So they do see the messaging that I talk about as well. So, sometimes that's in direct conversations. My boys are great at debating me on women in sport, and I have very strong opinions on that. But, every now and then I have to concede, Yep, I didn't think of it from that point of view. And so I think that's what you want to be doing as well, is bringing people along on the journey with you, so that you're not coming at things combative, but that you can converse and,
All right,
and understand someone else's perspective when you're trying to get your point across.
And I know earlier you mentioned, I want to focus in on, hey, I've got a few more years before the kids are kind of out of that, they're over 18, and like you said, they grow wings and maybe be gone. Have you start to think about, though, past that point, what things look like? Do you envision yourself drawing down on some of the properties that you have and doing anything extravagant? Do you plan on really doubling down on climbing? Just kind of curious, as you look forward in a couple of years, where you see life starting to direct.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things I really love to do. One of them is because I've spent so much time in the Himalayas, and then I'm always needing to sort of get this expedition done and then get home to my family, is I'd actually love to have a period living there where I can actually be volunteering and giving back. So whether that's through a teaching or I've had involvement in the Australian Himalayan Foundation, so I'd love to get involved in some of their programs, which are education, conservation and healthcare. So that's one thing I'd love to do. But then while I'm there, I might as well climb another 8,000. So love to do a big mountain. Got another big mountain in mind. I've stayed in touch with all of my climbing guides. So Pasang and I are great friends. Gabby climbed with Tendi. The last time I went back, I caught up with Lutka, and then we had two brothers climb with us, Kushung and Namjel. So I got to see 4 out of 5 of those guys. So I'd actually love to continue climbing with them. So the few other things I'd love to do is what's called a first ascent. So not the big mountains have all been climbed, but there's quite a few 6,000s that haven't been climbed. Just for something that's like completely different. I've got a little bit of unfinished business, so we didn't get to Perunzi, so I'd love to do that 7,000. There's a mountain called Arma de Blum, which is often called either Mother Necklace or Mother and Child. So that one just speaks to me because all the climbing I've done has been with my daughter. So yeah, the things, and then head to South America where there's all the volcanoes. So unfortunately, the more I travel, the more people I meet, the longer the bucket list grows. So another book that I actually, when I was most recently in Nepal, some of the people, the guys that I was travelling with were talking about a book called Die with Zero. I don't know if you've heard of that one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Love that book.
And so I'm like, wow, I'm slap bang in the middle of that period of 40 to 60 where I've got financial freedom, but I've also got probably, the strongest health and fitness until it starts. But who knows what age it starts declining. So this is a period where I want to start embracing physical activities and doing that while I can. And the kids don't quite understand the philosophy yet. What is Mum spending all of our inheritance? But the idea being that, in fact, this is my little light bulb moment I had on the eve of my 45th birthday. I went to bed going, oh, God, no, I'm halfway to 50. 50 sounds old. What are we going to do? Like, this just sounds terrible. And all of a sudden this light bulb went off and it went, you're not halfway to 50. You're halfway to 90. You've got half a life left to fill. So then I kind of went, now I've got to live to 108 because I'm 54 now. So I'm still only halfway. I've still got half a life left to fill. So I was saying to my kids, even if I make it to my 90s, right, you guys will be in your 60s then. That's not the time that you want to get an inheritance from your mum because hopefully you're already all set up. So I want to make sure that the funds that I've got at this period are actually being used to benefit my kids as they come through. So, and again, this is how privilege works. I can see that my kids have got access to Bank of Mum that will help them get to the positions that I've been able to get to, and not everybody has access to that. So again, there's this real disparity in wealth that I'd love to see that we can, and I think that's the work that you guys do, that you don't have to be on a high income to be able to start investing. It's about making a lot of good choices so that you can have this financial freedom later in life. And I think that education, because I think the higher the disparity we have between communities and income creates all sorts of other problems in our community. So bringing everyone up so that we've all got this sort of financial literacy, financial independence, I think benefits everyone as well. It's not like a finite pie that if I take this much out of it, there's nothing left for anyone else. It's not finite. So everyone should be getting this sort of literacy.
Our motto is financial independence for all. That's our motto for the podcast. So whether it's someone earning $30,000 a year, or we've had people on here earning tens of millions of dollars a year, there's ways to hit financial freedom. You just had to get creative. One thing I wanted to ask about, Jane, because as I was doing my research, scrolling back through your Instagram, I know you mentioned some of the physical challenges you have on your bucket list. There are some of these 6,000 and 7,000 meter mountains that haven't been climbed before.
Yeah.
Previously, you were a runner. Do you have any running challenges in your future? Because I'm all excited. I just did the Boston Marathon back in April. I'm doing the Philly Marathon in November. I look back and you ran a 90 kilometer, which is like 56-mile race a couple years back, like sub-9 time, great time. Are you also, or are you still keeping up with the running, or is it just climbing now?
No, still keeping up with the running. So the next challenge is in 3 weeks' time. I'm running a 4 peaks challenge.
What's that?
Which is, it's just 4 of our small mountains. So the highest one's only 1,900 metres. I'm talking metres here. So each day you run up a different peak. And I was chatting to one of the girls I was training with and going, oh, it looks like they're only like 2-hour days, 2 to 3 hours of running. And she said, oh, no, the event is up. You've then got to get yourself down. So you've got to come down on foot as well. So I've kind of got to double, like those 3-hour days are actually all 6-hour date. So that's the next goal. I did actually do a marathon earlier this year. I'm quite proud that it was my slowest ever marathon. I took over 9 hours to run the world's highest marathon. So I did go back to Nepal to do the Everest Marathon, which is from Everest Base Camp, running back down to Namche Bazaar. So still 42 kilometres. It's the most social marathon I've ever done. I swear I talked and videoed myself the whole way. Fell into pace with a group of women around me. There was 5 of us running together, and we just chatted, and 5 new best friends that I made. So I'm actually I'm still competitive. I'll always be competitive. I'm not as competitive I used to be because I can't be as fast as I was in my 40s. But yeah, this 4 Peaks challenge will then lead to the next thing. But I do come, I'm not sure how far back you could find about my family, but I do come of a very strong family of runners. So my sister Susan has represented Australia as half marathon, cross country. And then my brother goes by my maiden name, which was Robertson, so Peter. He was an Olympian, so he's a world champion triathlete and Olympian. So I think something within our family is we were just these suburban kids that did little athletics as kids, pretty ordinary, pretty average upbringing, and with hard work, bit of there's some natural talent in there, it's a bit of family talent, and commitment to what you do, you can achieve extraordinary things. So we're all just kind of the same type of humans, and we've all just got different abilities. I can appreciate that I was born in a body, and so sometimes I question, do I run because I've got the body to run, or do I have the body to run because... And I think that's a question about endurance as well. I've heard that said that people that do endurance sports have a different pain threshold, and which came first. So do you have the higher pain threshold because of the stuff you put yourself through, or do you enjoy sleeping on a tent on the side of a mountain because your pain threshold just is higher, and you go, oh, this is actually fun. I'm only cold for a certain period of time, and then I'll be okay again.
Sorry. One of the last things I was curious about is I know for myself, I've always just had this natural tendency to kind of get bored easily and always be looking at the next thing. And I've tried to really work on that, about being more reflective of what's going on now and being present. But it sounds like you also have a lot going on. You have all these interests and you have all these things that you want to go out there and accomplish. Is that something that maybe you've struggled with, or you have any advice for people with? Because I think sometimes we can overload ourselves with so much that it's hard to enjoy the thing that we're accomplishing now because we've got this next thing next week, and it's hard to kind of sit in it and soak in it and really feel and appreciate those accomplishments, which can almost take away, we can overdo our schedule. It can look awesome, on maybe on social media or whatever, but in the moment we can almost do too much on our plate.
I think that's a really important thing to note. So something I learned from my dad, I would wake up every morning and see my dad. We had a home that overlooked mountains that we could see, or not even mountains, small hills. And he would stand there every morning and reflect, and he would do this examine on his own body and presence, and he would reflect on 3 things that he was grateful for and what could I do better today. So something I can do better on. So I grew up watching that, and then seeing that my sons then got that same education in the school that they went to. So it's very much a Jesuit philosophy, this idea of reflection. Something I found when I finished Everest, you get to the summit and 2 things happen, or 2 completely opposing things happen. One is I look at it and I go, that's it. I'm done for life. I don't have to do anything else. I don't need to top that. I've done the best thing I could ever imagine. I loved it. I was good at it. I really enjoyed it. It's an achievement I achieved with my daughter. And then as soon as you get home, everyone says, what's next? And so you do start thinking about the next. So that's actually why it's been really nice just to have this last little period being around my kids as teens and going, all right, I'm going to put all that on hold. I've got plenty of time left to do that. And I'm going to look at this period. This period is really important with just being around and present for my kids, and then still have goals to go. But I've never been a goal writer who sort of writes goals down. So often I'll just be in chatting to someone. So a woman I was training with earlier this year, We connected because she knew I was a runner and she wanted to train for this Four Peaks event. And once the Nepal Marathon was out of the way, I'm like, yeah, what's the next thing? So then I sort of tapped in with her and went, I think I'll do this event with you. So I tend to just find, but as soon as someone tells you, like, you're going, oh, you're doing the Boston Marathon, I haven't done that one yet. I need to check my qualifier. And I saw a quote that says the joy of aging is Boston gets easier to qualify for. So I think that's a bit of a marathon quote.
Well, once you make it over for the Boston
so
Marathon,
I think there'll always be goals. Once you've done it? Yeah.
Once you make it over to Boston,
I'd love to hear. I've actually, I have been there and I've watched the Boston Marathon, so that was kind of inspiring just to see everyone. And the best period, I reckon, to be watching a marathon is as your 4-hour marathon runners are coming through, because these are the guys, or the people, not guys and girls, who have really put the hard slog in, and they're not running for high speeds, and it's a long time to be out there on your feet if you're out there for 4 hours, 5 hours. So that achievement is really immense, and they're actually the athletes that I really admire.
Awesome. Well, this is definitely not the last time. Sorry, Justin.
I was just saying, I apologize for kind of pausing for a second. Leslie's having a car problem and she's stuck, and so.
Okay, well, we're bringing this thing to a close
I
anyway.
just wanted to let you know why I was being quiet for a second.
I lost power. That's why I popped out.
Yeah, you dropped out.
There's road work in my street. We're back now, though. Okay, this is the magic of editing, Jane. Okay. Well, Jane, I know this is not the last that we're going to be hearing of you, and our audience is going to be hearing of you. It sounds like you have a lot more that you want to accomplish, whether that's physical challenges or advocating for certain groups or teaching or spreading financial education. For people who want to keep up and hear more about Jane and what you got going on, where is the best place or places for them to do that?
So Instagram is probably where I'm most active, which is Jane_Kaniz. For some reason I didn't spell my whole name, but I quite like how cryptic it is. So Jane Kaniz. And then my website is just my name, janekanizay.com. So I'd actually love to be doing more speaking to groups, because there's something about talking about being on big mountains. It's just really enjoyable to talk about. Like, it surprises me how much I loved that challenge of all the really the hardest parts of it, like climbing in the dark. I think we opened with that, what it felt like to be in the dark with a head torch on, just climbing in the footsteps of amazing people that have gone before you. So, that's what I hope to continue doing as well.
Well, Jane, this has been a cool full circle moment for me. I know the reason I ended up hiking Kili in the first place was I had a friend who called me randomly. I just said yes without thinking much about it because they had someone drop out. I go on the trip. I randomly, introduced myself to Caitlin, which then lets me introduce myself or get introduced to you and have you on the show and share this awesome story with us. So I hope that this kind of inspires people, both your story and this situation of how we got here, to just say yes to stuff and to get out there and to try things and to maybe do some things that are a little uncomfortable or they're unsure about, and because you never know where it might lead. But I thank you so much for the time. You obviously have a lot going on, but an awesome story and a lot of good knowledge to share with the audience. So I appreciate it.
Oh, thanks so much. It's been so cool to meet you guys. You're really awesome in what you do and how you inspire others as well. So that's really important.